Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute professional financial, legal, or tax advice. The historical trends, data points, and case studies discussed are intended to provide a broad overview of consumer market shifts and do not account for individual circumstances. Viewers are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with qualified professionals, such as certified financial planners or legal counsel, before making significant life or financial decisions. The American family unit is not just a social structure. It is the single largest engine of the United States economy. But there is a silent, massive shift happening in that engine that almost no one is talking about. Over the last 4 decades, the number of divorced men in the U.S. has more than quadrupled, creating a shadow economy worth hundreds of billions of dollars. If you look at the data from the mid-20th century versus today, you will see a staggering divergence. In 1960, the consumer market for men was almost exclusively defined by the provider archetype. The man who bought the station wagon, the suburban home, and the life insurance policy to protect a nuclear family. Today, that market has fractured. We are seeing the rise of a distinct, powerful, and often overlooked consumer demographic, the divorced father. This group is responsible for a massive surge in specific sectors ranging from mid-tier luxury, housing to the rapid expansion of the convenience and experience economy. This video solves a critical problem for you today, understanding how the historical evolution of the U.S. consumer market has specifically reshaped the financial and social landscape for divorced men. By analyzing the shift from the 1970s no-fault divorce boom to the modern gray divorce phenomenon, we can identify the historical trends that dictate how assets are divided, how spending habits change, and how the market now targets men in transition. We are going to dive deep into the data of how a single event, divorce, historically triggers a total reconfiguration of a man's balance sheet, moving him from a shared resource consumer to an independent utility consumer. This is a masterclass in the economic history of the American male after the decree is signed. To understand where we are, we have to look at the 1970s. This was the decade of the Great Decoupling. Before 1969, divorce in the United States often required a showing of fault, adultery, abandonment, or cruelty. This meant that the consumer market for men was incredibly stable because the barriers to exit a marriage were high. Men were seen by brands like Ford, Sears, and General Electric as the chief purchasing officers of a permanent household. However, with the introduction of no-fault divorce laws, starting in California under Ronald Reagan, the legal and economic friction of ending a marriage dropped. Historically, this led to the first major spike in the split household economy. Suddenly, instead of one mortgage, one set of utility bills, and one grocery budget, the U.S. market saw the creation of 2 separate consumption units. For the divorced dad of the 70s and 80s, this was a period of extreme economic contraction. Case studies from this era show that men often experienced a lifestyle shock, where their disposable income for personal luxury plummeted as they navigated the new world of child support and alimony, which were often calculated based on the previous era's higher stability assumptions. However, as we moved into the 1990s and 2000s, the consumer market began to adapt to this growing demographic. We saw the birth of the bachelor pad as a commercial concept. Retailers began to realize that divorced men weren't just single. They were men who needed to recreate a home for their children in a second location. This created a boom in the duplicate goods market. If you are a divorced father, you aren't just buying one set of Legos or one gaming console. The market relies on you buying a second set for the weekend house. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows a fascinating trend in how spending habits shift for men post-divorce. Historically, there is a marked decrease in spending on long-term durables like home renovations or large appliances, and a massive uptick in discretionary service spending. This includes dining out, travel, and fitness. The market transitioned from selling a man the dream of the white picket fence to selling him the dream of the reinvigorated self. We also have to discuss the financial penalty of transition. Historical data suggests that while men may eventually see a small premium in individual income years after a divorce due to increased labor supply, the immediate 5-year window following a split is often a period of significant capital erosion. This is because of the transaction costs of divorce, legal fees, the physical cost of moving, and the loss of economies of scale. When 2 people live together, the cost per person for heat, internet, and housing is lower. Once you split, the divorced man often finds himself paying 70% of the previous household's total costs, but with only 50% of the previous total income. Let's look at the housing market specifically. Historically, divorced men have been the primary drivers of the luxury rental and condominium markets in suburban hubs. Unlike never-married single men, divorced dads often have a requirement for multi-bedroom units to accommodate children, but they lack the desire or the time capital to maintain a traditional lawn and exterior. This led to the development of the full-service residential model we see today, buildings with gyms, pools, and shared spaces that provide the social scaffolding that was previously provided by the family unit. By the 2010s, we saw the rise of experience-based parenting in the consumer market. Brands began to target divorced fathers with high-cost, high-impact travel packages and bonding experiences. The historical trend shows that because divorced men often have less quantity of time with their children, they are more likely to spend higher quality of dollars. This is what economists call compensatory consumption. As we move toward the present day, we encounter the gray divorce trend, individuals over the age of 50 ending long-term marriages. This is a massive shift in the U.S. consumer market. These men are often entering the market with more significant assets than the younger divorcees of the 1980s. They are the target for the wellness and longevity industry. Historical trends show that men in this bracket significantly increase spending on health optimization, preventative medicine, and high-end automotive purchases as they re-enter the dating market or seek to redefine their identity outside of a 30-year marriage. Understanding these historical cycles is not just about looking at the past. It's about recognizing the patterns that govern your current financial reality. The market is designed to capitalize on transition. When you are in a state of flux, you are more susceptible to identity-based spending. You are trying to buy the tools to build a new version of yourself. By looking at the historical data, we can see that the most successful economic outcomes for divorced men occur when they resist the consumer rebound, the urge to immediately replace lost status with new purchases, and instead focus on the stabilization phase. In the next sections of this deep dive, we will break down the specific sectors of the market, from the legal industrial complex to the subtle ways the food and beverage industry has redesigned itself for the single-father household. We will look at step-by-step examples of how to audit your own spending against these historical benchmarks to ensure you are not falling into the transactional traps that have caught millions of men since the 1970s. This is about more than just money. It's about the historical evolution of what it means to be a man, a father, and a consumer in the American landscape. Stay tuned, because the data we are about to reveal on the hidden costs of household duplication will change the way you look at your monthly bank statement forever. To understand the true weight of the hidden costs of household duplication, we have to examine the concept of the efficiency loss ratio. In a standard American household circa 2026, the economy of scale is the primary driver of middle-class wealth preservation. When a family of 4 shares a roof, the marginal cost of the third and fourth person is significantly lower than the cost of the first 2. However, the moment a household splits, that efficiency vanishes. Historically, the divorced father is the one who bears the brunt of recreating a functional domestic infrastructure from scratch. This isn't just about buying a second toaster. It is about the structural redundancy of modern life. Imagine a man named David living in a high-cost-of-living area like Northern Virginia in 2026. David is a divorced father of 2. Before his split, David's household spent approximately $400 a month on a comprehensive high-speed fiber internet and premium streaming bundle that served the entire family. Post-divorce, to maintain the same level of connectivity and entertainment for his children during their custodial weekends, David must pay for a separate $150 fiber line and a $100 suite of streaming services. He is now paying $250 a month for a utility that is only being used at full capacity roughly 8 to 10 days out of the month. Historically, this is known as the idle capacity tax. Over a decade, this single duplication of digital infrastructure, adjusted for inflation, can cost a father upwards of $30,000 in capital that otherwise could have been directed toward a college fund or retirement. The duplication of physical goods is even more aggressive. Let's look at the historical data regarding the toy and hobby industry. Since the early 2000s, manufacturers have pivoted their marketing strategies to acknowledge the dual household reality. There is a phenomenon often called the suitcase burden. Historically, children moving between homes results in significant wear and tear on personal items, or more commonly, the loss of those items. To mitigate the emotional stress of the transition, the consumer market has conditioned divorced fathers to purchase identical sets of essentials. This includes everything from heavy-duty items like car seats and cribs to everyday items like school supplies, clothing, and electronics. In 2026, the cost of a top-tier, safety-rated convertible car seat averages $350. For a father with 2 young children, providing a safe transport environment means a $700 immediate layout. If we look at historical case studies of household spending from the 1990s compared to today, we see that the percentage of a divorced father's income dedicated to redundant durable goods has increased by nearly 22%. This is largely due to the increased complexity and technological requirements of modern parenting. You are no longer just buying a spare set of clothes. You are buying spare tablets, chargers, and specific ergonomic furniture that mirrors the other household to provide a sense of stability. But the most significant historical shift in the consumer market for divorced dads is found in the real estate sector. Specifically, the rise of the 3-bedroom apartment paradox. Historically, a single man would be a prime candidate for a studio or 1-bedroom unit. However, the American legal and social expectation for joint custody requires fathers to provide adequate, dedicated space for their children. In 2026, the price spread between a 1-bedroom and a 3-bedroom apartment in a metro area like Dallas or Atlanta is often $1,200 or more per month. The divorced father is effectively paying a $14,000 annual premium for square footage that remains empty for 50 to 70% of the year. This brings us to the historical trend of real estate shrinkage. Developers in 2026 have begun specifically designing flex space units targeted at this demographic. These are apartments with small, windowless dens marketed as bedrooms for children. While these units are sold as a cost-saving measure, historical market analysis shows that they actually command a higher price per square foot than traditional units, effectively monetizing the divorced father's need for compliance with custody standards. Beyond the walls of the home, the consumer market has also evolved to capture the time poverty of the divorced father. Historically, the division of labor in a nuclear family allowed for bulk shopping, meal prep, and domestic maintenance. Post-divorce, many men find themselves in a position where they are balancing a full-time career with 100% of the domestic duties during their custody periods. This has led to the explosion of the convenience premium economy. Case studies from 2024 to 2026 show that divorced fathers are 35% more likely to utilize grocery delivery services and 50% more likely to use prepared meal kit services compared to married fathers. While these services provide a necessary bridge for men managing high-stress careers and solo parenting, they represent a significant drain on liquid capital. A meal that costs $8 to prepare from raw ingredients in a shared labor household often costs $22 when outsourced to the convenience market. When you multiply this by 3 people over a 4-day weekend, twice a month, the convenience premium begins to rival the cost of a monthly car payment. We also have to analyze the legacy of debt within the consumer market. Historically, the process of liquidating a joint household often involves selling a primary residence and splitting the equity. In the high-interest rate environment of the mid-2020s, many divorced men are moving from a 3% fixed-rate mortgage on a family home into a 7 or 8% mortgage on a smaller individual property, or worse, into the volatile rental market. This interest rate shock is a silent wealth killer. A man who previously had a $2,000 mortgage payment might find himself paying $3,500 for a property with half the equity building potential. This is a massive historical shift in how wealth is transferred out of the hands of the individual and into the hands of financial institutions. This historical review also uncovers the rise of defensive spending. This is a specific consumer behavior where divorced fathers spend money on high-end extracurriculars, tutors, and specialized equipment as a way to remain competitive in the parenting market. Brands have recognized this, and we see targeted advertising for elite summer camps and private coaching, specifically hitting the social media feeds of men in this demographic. The psychological drive to ensure their children don't fall behind due to the divorce leads to a historical uptick in non-essential educational spending that often exceeds the father's actual discretionary budget. Step by step, the consumer market has built a series of financial checkpoints that extract value from a man's transition. It starts with the legal fees, moves into the duplication of household goods, escalates with the real estate premium, and is sustained by the convenience economy and defensive spending. To navigate this, one must view every purchase through the lens of utility versus emotion. The historical data shows that men who successfully maintain their wealth post-divorce are those who treat their second household not as a mirrored image of the first, but as a lean, optimized satellite office. But here is where the story takes a turn. While we have focused on the outward flow of cash, there is an even more complex system at play regarding how the U.S. tax code and the insurance industry view the divorced male. There is a hidden tax cliff that many men don't see coming until the 1st April after their decree is finalized, and it can result in a net loss of thousands of dollars in a single year. We are going to look at the historical data of the head of household status and why the way you choose to file could be the difference between financial recovery and a decade of debt. In the next part of this deep dive, we are going into the insurance trap. We will look at how the historical shift in health and life insurance premiums specifically targets the newly single father, and why your current policy might actually be a liability in disguise. You need to see the numbers on how the single-payer premium has outpaced inflation by 300% since the 1990s. The next chapter will redefine how you protect your assets. The insurance trap is not a single event, but a slow-motion collision with the administrative reality of the modern U.S. economy. To understand how we arrived at the current state of 2026, we have to look back at the historical evolution of how risk is priced for the American male. In the mid-1980s, insurance was largely built around the family unit. Life, health, and auto policies were heavily discounted for married men, because actuarial data suggested that a shared household lowered the risk of accidental loss, improved health outcomes, and encouraged safer driving habits. When a man moves from married to divorced, the insurance industry historically shifts him from a low-risk category to a high-risk category, often without a single change in his actual behavior. Imagine a man named Marcus in 2026. Marcus is 45 years old, has a clean driving record, and is in excellent health. Before his divorce, Marcus and his spouse were on a joint automotive policy that cost $2,200 a year for 2 modern vehicles. Upon the dissolution of the marriage, Marcus finds that his individual policy for a single vehicle, the same one he drove before, now costs $1,600. Historically, this is known as the marriage penalty in insurance pricing. The industry views the lack of a second driver in the household as an indicator of a lifestyle change that might include more nighttime driving or a less stable routine. For Marcus, this represents an immediate 45% increase in the cost per vehicle, a trend that has been accelerating since the early 2010s as data analytics have become more granular. But the real crisis happens in the health insurance sector. Historically, the U.S. consumer market for healthcare was designed for the employer-sponsored family plan. When a divorce occurs, the non-employee spouse is often dropped from the plan, but the employee father often faces a paradoxical financial hit. If he wants to keep his children on his plan while his ex-spouse moves to her own, he often stays in the family or employee plus children tier. In 2026, the gap between an individual plan and an employee plus children plan can be as much as $600 per month in out-of-pocket premiums. Historically, these premiums have risen at triple the rate of the Consumer Price Index. A divorced father is frequently paying for a full family-size safety net on a single income, creating a massive drain on his monthly liquidity. Let us look at the historical data regarding life insurance. For a divorced father, life insurance is often not just a personal choice but a court-mandated requirement to secure child support and alimony obligations. This creates what economists call inelastic demand. Because Marcus is legally required to maintain a policy, he loses the ability to shop the market based on his own financial goals. Instead, he must purchase a policy that meets the specific face value requirements of his divorce decree. Historically, this leads to men overpaying for term life policies because they are in a rush to satisfy legal mandates during the finalization of their divorce. In 1995, a standard $500,000 term policy was a minor line item. In 2026, with the inflation of the cost of living and education, courts are increasingly mandating $1 million to $2 million policies, which carry significantly higher premiums for men in their 40s and 50s. Beyond insurance, we must address the hidden tax cliff. Historically, one of the greatest shocks to the American divorced father is the shift in filing status. For years, he likely filed as married filing jointly, benefiting from the widest tax brackets and the highest standard deduction. The year after the divorce, unless he has primary physical custody for more than half the year, he may be forced to file as single rather than head of household. In 2026, the difference in the standard deduction between head of household and single is significant, but the real impact is in the tax brackets. A man earning $100,000 a year will see a larger percentage of his income taxed at higher rates the moment he loses the joint filing status. Consider the case study of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. and its subsequent evolutions into 2026. Historically, alimony was tax-deductible for the payer and taxable for the recipient. This allowed the higher-earning spouse, usually the father, to shift some of the tax burden. However, for all divorces finalized after December 31, 2018, that deduction vanished. This means that in 2026, a father like Marcus is paying child support and potentially alimony with after-tax dollars. He is being taxed on money that he does not get to keep. This historical shift has effectively reduced the real-world purchasing power of divorced men by an estimated 15 to 20% compared to men who divorced in the 1990s. Step by step, the financial walls close in. You have the loss of the joint tax return, the loss of the alimony deduction, and the surge in insurance premiums. But the consumer market has an even more subtle way of extracting wealth: the credit score erosion. Historically, divorce is one of the leading causes of credit score volatility. Even if Marcus is diligent, the closure of joint accounts, the high utilization of new individual credit lines to fund a new apartment, and the potential for a former spouse's mispayment on a joint debt can tank a credit score by 100 points in a matter of months. In the 2026 economy, a lower credit score doesn't just mean higher interest rates on a car loan. It means higher premiums on that insurance we just discussed. It is a feedback loop of mounting costs. Imagine if you could see the ledger of the average U.S. divorce data from 1980 versus 2026. In 1980, the primary concern was the direct payment to the ex-spouse. In 2026, the primary concern is the systemic leak of capital to third-party institutions, insurance companies, the IRS, and credit lenders. These are the silent partners in every divorce. They are the entities that have historically benefited from the fragmentation of the American family. They have optimized their pricing models to ensure that two single households are always more profitable to the system than one joint household. To survive this, the modern divorced man must become a forensic accountant of his own life. You have to understand that the consumer market views you as a high-value target for high-margin products. From the car dealership that knows you need a reliable vehicle for custody exchanges to the insurance agent who sees your change in marital status as a reason to re-rate your risk, the pressure is constant. Historical trends show that the men who successfully navigate this are the ones who aggressively deleverage their lives. They stop trying to maintain the outward appearance of their pre-divorce lifestyle and instead focus on the raw math of their new reality. But even if you master your taxes and your insurance, there is another historical shift that is currently reshaping the landscape for men over 40. It is the rise of the digital dating industrial complex and the wellness optimization market. This is where the consumer market moves from your needs to your insecurities. We are going to look at the data on how much the average divorced man spends on subscription-based dating apps and health supplements in a desperate bid to re-enter a market that has changed fundamentally since he was last single. In the next part, we dive into the predatory world of re-entry marketing. We will examine how algorithms in 2026 identify newly divorced men and serve them a specific cocktail of lifestyle upgrades that promise a new beginning, but often deliver a new cycle of debt. You need to see how the new life package is being sold to you, one subscription at a time. The numbers on the dating app tax will stun you. The dating app tax is a phenomenon that historically emerged with the digitization of romance, but by 2026, it has evolved into a sophisticated extraction engine, specifically tuned to the demographics of divorced men. To understand the scale of this, we have to look back at the historical shift from the 1990s personals and early 2000s matchmaking sites to the current algorithmic landscape. In the early days of the internet, a man might pay a flat monthly fee of $20 or $30 for a single platform. Today, the consumer market has fragmented into a tiered, high-frequency microtransaction model. Imagine a man named Robert in 2026. Robert is 52, living in a suburb of Chicago, and has been out of the marriage market for over 20 years. When Robert re-enters the dating world, he isn't just downloading an app. He is entering a competitive marketplace where visibility is a paid commodity. Historically, dating apps used a simple ELO score to rank desirability. In 2026, those algorithms have been replaced by dynamic pricing models. Robert finds that to even have his profile seen by a statistically significant number of potential partners, he must subscribe to premium tiers that cost between $60 and $100 per month. But the spending doesn't stop at the subscription. The market has introduced the concept of the boost or the super-like, digital microtransactions that promise to move a profile to the front of the line. Case studies of consumer behavior in 2026 show that divorced men in the 40 to 60 age bracket are the highest spending demographic on these individual features. For a man like Robert, who may feel a sense of urgency to rebuild his social life, spending $5 here and $10 there can easily add up to an additional $200 a month. This is the dating app tax, a recurring high-margin expense that has no historical equivalent for the previous generation of divorced fathers. This leads us directly into the broader world of re-entry marketing. The moment Robert's digital footprint indicates a change in marital status, through changes in social media profiles, new rental agreements, or shifts in search history, the advertising algorithms trigger a specific sequence. This is the new life package. It starts with the wardrobe. Historically, a married man's clothing purchases were often utilitarian or influenced by a partner. Post-divorce, the consumer market targets him with the concept of the style overhaul. Robert is served ads for direct-to-consumer custom tailoring services, premium denim brands, and subscription-style boxes. The data suggests that the average divorced man spends more on personal apparel in the first 18 months post-divorce than he did in the previous 5 years combined. This is a classic example of identity-based spending. The market isn't just selling Robert a shirt. It is selling him the image of a man who is still relevant, capable, and desirable. The cost of this identity can be staggering. A full wardrobe refresh in 2026, including footwear and accessories, can easily exceed $5,000, often financed through buy now pay later services that add another layer of interest-bearing debt to his already strained balance sheet. Next comes the wellness and longevity industry. Historically, men's health was marketed around performance in sports. In 2026, for the divorced father, it is marketed around biological age reversal. Robert begins seeing ads for testosterone replacement therapy, personalized vitamin stacks, and high-tech fitness wearables. While maintaining health is objectively valuable, the consumer market has turned it into a luxury status symbol. The historical trend shows a move away from the simple gym membership toward boutique, data-driven health clubs that can cost $300 to $500 a month. In this deep dive, we have to examine the step-by-step psychological grooming that occurs. Step 1. The market highlights a perceived deficiency. Robert feels older or out of shape compared to the images he sees on his feed. Step 2. The market offers a high-cost, high-tech solution that feels like a shortcut. Step 3. The market attaches a subscription model to that solution to ensure long-term extraction. By the time Robert has his dating apps, his new wardrobe, his supplements, and his boutique gym membership, he has effectively added a second mortgage's worth of monthly expenses to his life, all in the name of re-entry. There is also the historical rise of the hobby industrial complex. For many divorced fathers, the sudden increase in solitary time leads to a resurgence in interest-based spending. Whether it is high-end mountain biking, golf, overlanding vehicles, or home theater setups, the consumer market is ready to provide an outlet for both time and capital. Data from 2025 indicates that divorced men are the primary growth drivers for midlife hobby sectors. A man who might have hesitated to spend $3,000 on a hobby, while married now views it as a necessary investment in his mental health or social circle. However, historical case studies suggest that this spending often provides diminishing returns. The thrill of the new equipment wears off, but the monthly payments remain. This is the hidden trap of the midlife transition. The attempt to fill an emotional void with high-end durable goods. The market knows that in the wake of a divorce, a man's sense of self is often unanchored, making him the perfect candidate for aspirational consumption. He isn't buying a mountain bike. He is buying the idea of himself as an adventurer. But perhaps the most insidious part of re-entry marketing is the social scaffolding industry. In 2026, we are seeing the growth of membership-based social clubs and networking groups specifically designed for men in transition. These groups offer community and connection, but at a premium. Historically, these connections were formed organically through work, neighborhood, or family. As those structures have weakened, the market has stepped in to commodify friendship and belonging. For Robert, the price of a social life is now a line item on his credit card statement. What we are seeing is a total commercialization of the male transition. From the way he dates to the way he dresses and the way he spends his free time, every aspect of the divorced father's new life is being monitored and monetized by algorithms that understand his vulnerabilities better than he does. The historical shift from 1980 to 2026 is a move from a man who lost money in a divorce settlement to a man who is continuously losing money to a lifestyle he was told he needed to have. The numbers don't lie. When you add up the dating app tax, the style overhaul, the wellness subscriptions, and the hobby industrial complex, the average divorced man in 2026 is operating at a massive financial deficit compared to his married peers, even if their base salaries are identical. This is why understanding the historical trends of the consumer market is vital. If you can see the hook, you can avoid the bait. You have to ask yourself, are you building a new life? Or are you just buying one from a curated list of advertisements? But there is a specific type of spending that is even more dangerous because it feels like an obligation. It is the spending associated with the children of divorce, the phenomenon of the Disneyland dad, and the historical rise of material parenting. The market has found a way to use a father's guilt as a sales tool, and the results are reshaping the toy, travel, and tech industries in ways that are both fascinating and terrifying. In the next part, we are going to expose the economics of the Disneyland dad. We will look at the historical data on how divorced fathers spend on gifts and travel compared to married fathers, and why the market specifically targets your guilt to drive sales of high-ticket items. We are going to break down the cost of buying time and how it impacts your long-term wealth. The data on the guilt spend will change the way you plan your next custodial weekend. The economics of the Disneyland dad are built on a foundation of emotional labor and market-driven guilt. Historically, this term emerged in the 1980s to describe the non-custodial father who, lacking the mundane rhythms of daily life, the homework help, the Tuesday night baths, the early morning cereal, overcompensates by turning every visit into a high-octane consumer event. In 2026, the market has evolved to facilitate this behavior on an industrial scale. We are no longer just talking about a trip to a theme park. We are talking about a total shift in the consumer habits of men who feel the need to buy back their relevance in their children's lives. Imagine a man named Thomas in 2026. Thomas has his 2 children every other weekend. Historically, the 1950s version of this father might have taken the kids to a local park or a movie. But Thomas lives in an era of hyper-competitive parenting. When his children arrive at his apartment, he feels the crushing weight of the silent house and the limited hours. To fill that space, Thomas turns to the experience economy. He isn't just ordering pizza. He is ordering the premium, artisanal delivery that costs $60. He isn't just playing catch. He is booking an hour at a high-tech, indoor sports simulator for $80. Over a single 48-hour period, Thomas can easily spend $500 to $800 on experiences that are designed to be high-impact and highly Instagrammable. This is the guilt spend. Historically, the U.S. consumer market has recognized that a father's spending power is often unlocked by the fear of being the boring parent. Data from the toy and entertainment industry in 2025 shows that divorced fathers are 40% more likely to purchase the highest-tier version of a product. Think the $500 Lego Collector Series versus the $40 starter kit, compared to married fathers. The logic, often subconscious, is that a bigger gift creates a more durable memory. However, the historical trend of this behavior shows that it creates an unsustainable financial ceiling. Once you have established the expectation of a high-ticket weekend, the cost of maintaining that bond becomes a permanent, inflating line item in your budget. Let us look at the historical data of the travel and hospitality sector. Since the mid-2010s, there has been a significant rise in father-child, specialized travel packages. In 2026, these are marketed as essential bonding retreats. They often involve high-adventure activities like guided fly fishing, desert off-roading, or international sporting events. For a father like Thomas, these trips represent a massive capital outlay. While a married family might plan one large vacation a year, the divorced father often feels pressured to create a peak experience every single time he has vacation time. Case studies of consumer debt in 2026 indicate that travel expenses for non-custodial fathers have outpaced general tourism inflation by nearly 15%. This is because these fathers are less likely to hunt for deals and more likely to pay a premium for convenience and guaranteed fun. But the Disneyland dad phenomenon isn't just about the big trips. It is about the digital pacifier market. Historically, when a father feels ill-equipped to manage the emotional complexity of a weekend alone with children who are missing their primary home, he turns to the electronics market. In 2026, this means the latest VR headsets, high-end gaming rigs, and multiple subscription services. The historical trend here is the shift from active parenting to facilitated entertainment. The market knows that a father who is unsure of himself is a father who will buy the most expensive hardware to ensure the kids are happy. This creates a hidden cost: the upgrade cycle. Once you buy the console, you must buy the games, the peripherals, and the fiber optic internet speed to support it, adding hundreds of dollars to your monthly overhead. Step by step, the consumer market has mapped out the weekend of the divorced father. Friday night, the welcome feast via high-end delivery apps. Saturday, the core memory event, usually involving a high-ticket ticketed venue. Sunday morning, the parting gift, a trip to a retail store where a physical item is purchased to bridge the gap until the next visit. This cycle is a masterpiece of retail engineering. It targets the specific windows of time when a man's emotional defenses are at their lowest. We also have to discuss the historical rise of the subscription box for dads. These are services that curate activities for you, taking the cognitive load out of parenting. While they are marketed as tools for connection, they are also tools for extraction. By 2026, these services have moved into the digital realm, with apps that suggest optimized weekend itineraries based on your location and the age of your children. Each suggestion is, of course, a sponsored link to a consumer experience. The father is no longer the architect of his time. He is a consumer of a prepackaged parenting identity. Imagine the long-term impact of this behavior. If Thomas spends an extra $400 every custodial weekend, that is nearly $10,000 a year. Over 10 years, that is $100,000, plus the lost opportunity cost of that money being invested in a diversified portfolio. Historically, the Disneyland approach is a primary reason why divorced men often reach their 60s with significantly less liquid net worth than their married counterparts, even if they had higher career earnings. They have literally spent their retirement on weekend peak experiences and retail therapy for their children. There is also a social cost to this historical trend. The material parenting model creates a competitive environment between households. If the father is the fun house and the mother is the rules house, the consumer market wins on both sides. The father buys the toys to compete for affection, and the mother is often forced to increase her own spending to maintain balance. The historical data on household spending post-divorce shows a ratchet effect, where the total cost of raising the child in two homes becomes 1.5 to 2 times higher than in a single home, largely driven by this competitive consumption. To break this cycle, one has to look at the historical data on what children actually value. Case studies in developmental psychology suggest that the peak experiences purchased in the Disneyland dad model have a high decay rate in memory. The expensive gift bought on a Sunday afternoon is often forgotten by Tuesday. What the market hides from you is that time utility, simply being present and engaged, has a much higher ROI than capital utility. However, there is no way for a corporation to monetize a game of tag in a public park, so the market will never show you that option in your social media feed. This leads us to the final and perhaps most overlooked historical shift in the consumer market for divorced dads: the home as a stage. In 2026, the interior design and furniture market has begun targeting divorced men with the idea of the ultimate guest suite for their children. These are no longer just spare bedrooms. They are high-concept, themed environments designed to make the child feel like their father's home is a destination. This involves custom murals, high-end lighting systems, and specialized furniture that can cost thousands of dollars per room. It is the physical manifestation of the Disneyland dad. A permanent, expensive set designed to project an image of stability and excitement. But what happens when the weekend ends? What happens to the man when the house goes quiet and the stage is empty? The consumer market has an answer for that too, and it involves a deep dive into the solo male wellness and self-optimization sectors that we touched on earlier, but with a darker, more isolation-driven twist. In the next part, we are going into the coping economy. We will examine the historical rise of the solo consumer industries, from high-end alcohol and gourmet solo dining to the rise of digital companionship and the monetization of male loneliness. We are going to look at the data on how much the average divorced man spends on numbing behaviors and how the market specifically designs products to fill the silence of a Sunday night. The numbers on the loneliness premium are a wake-up call for any man living in a split household. The coping economy is a multi-billion-dollar sector of the United States consumer market that specifically thrives on the silence of a Sunday night. Historically, when a father drops his children off at their primary residence and returns to an empty home, there is a physiological and psychological drop in cortisol and dopamine levels. This transition, known as the Sunday night slump, has been meticulously studied by consumer behavioralists. In the mid-20th century, this demographic was statistically insignificant, but in 2026, the market has pivoted to create a suite of products designed to act as emotional substitutes for the presence of others. Imagine a man named Steven. It is Sunday evening in 2026, and his two-bedroom apartment in suburban New Jersey feels cavernous after his kids have left. Historically, a man in Steven's position might have turned on a terrestrial radio or watched whatever was on the three major television networks. Today, Steven is greeted by a highly sophisticated digital ecosystem designed to monetize his isolation. This starts with the loneliness premium in the food and beverage industry. Data from 2024 and 2025 shows that single-person households spend 45% more per capita on food than multi-person households. For Steven, this manifests in the high-end alcohol and gourmet solo dining market. Historically, the alcohol industry has shifted its marketing from social lubrication to refined solitary consumption. Steven has served ads for limited-run bourbons, craft beer subscription clubs, and specialized glassware. The pitch is subtle. You aren't drinking alone. You are a connoisseur enjoying a premium experience. Case studies of consumer spending in the post-divorce demographic indicate that men in their 40s and 50s are the primary consumers of super premium spirits, often spending upwards of $200 a month on alcohol that is consumed without company. This is a classic example of numbing consumption, purchasing high-status items to mitigate a low-status emotional state. Then there is the surge in solo dining delivery. In 2026, delivery platforms have optimized their algorithms to suggest high-ticket, single-serving meals to men in Steven's geographic and marital bracket. Historically, delivery was about convenience for families. Now, it is about the dopamine hit of a luxury meal for one. When Steven orders a $45 steak for delivery, including service fees and a 20% tip, he is paying for more than sustenance. He is paying for a ritual to fill the time that used to be occupied by family dinner. The historical trend shows that these small, frequent expenditures on Sunday and Monday nights can erode a man's savings at a rate that is often overlooked because each individual transaction feels justifiable as a treat. But the coping economy goes deeper than food and drink. We are currently seeing the historical rise of the digital companion market. In 2026, this isn't just about social media. It is about the monetization of interactive solitude. Steven might spend his evening on high-end streaming platforms or engaging with AI-driven entertainment. Historically, the U.S. market saw a boom in pet ownership among divorced men, the classic companion dog. While that trend continues, it has been joined by the subscription-based companionship model. Consider the case study of the premium podcast and interactive streaming industry. Men in the 35 to 55 demographic are the largest contributors to platform-specific memberships and listener-supported content. Why? Because these creators provide a parasocial relationship. For Steven, listening to a familiar voice for 3 hours on a Sunday night provides a sense of belonging that the consumer market has successfully commodified. Historically, this social need was met by local VFW halls, bowling leagues, or neighborhood gatherings. In 2026, those organic structures have been replaced by a pay-to-play model of digital community. Step by step, the market identifies the void and offers a product to bridge it. Step 1. The recognition of the transition period, the drop-off. Step 2. The delivery of a high-sensory experience, the meal or the drink. Step 3. The provision of a background narrative, the digital companion. This creates a cycle where the divorced father becomes a heavy user of high-margin, low-utility services. We must also examine the historical trend of the solo aspirational market. This is where the consumer market targets a man's desire to prove his vitality through solo adventure or high-end gear. Historically, a man might have bought a motorcycle. In 2026, the trend is toward the high-tech home gym and the biohacking suite. Steven spends $3,000 on an AI-driven home gym system because it promises a community of virtual lifters. He is buying a gym membership, but he is also buying a simulated social environment. The historical data on these products shows a high initial purchase rate among divorced men, followed by a steady subscription revenue stream, even if the actual usage of the equipment drops off after 6 months. The loneliness premium also extends into the housing market in a way we haven't yet discussed. The smart home of isolation. Developers in 2026 are marketing apartments to divorced dads that feature integrated voice assistants, automated lighting, and sound systems designed to create an immersive environment. Historically, home automation was sold as a way to manage a busy family home. Now it is sold as a way to ensure a man never has to walk into a dark, silent house. The cost of these integrated systems is often rolled into premium rents or high-end condo fees, representing a permanent tax on the desire to avoid the physical sensations of being alone. Imagine if you could calculate the total cost of the coping economy over a 5-year period. If you add the premium alcohol, the luxury solo delivery, the digital subscriptions, and the high-end solitary hobbies, the average divorced father in 2026 is often spending $15,000 to $20,000 a year just to manage his emotional state during his non-custodial time. This is capital that could have been used to eliminate debt or build a robust investment portfolio. Historically, this is one of the most significant ways that the U.S. consumer market keeps men in a state of financial precariousness post-divorce. The data suggests that the market is essentially betting on your inability to sit in a quiet room. Every notification on your phone on a Sunday night, every suggestion for a new show, a new bottle, or a new gadget is a calculated attempt to capitalize on that moment of vulnerability. By understanding the historical shift from organic social connection to commodified emotional management, you can start to see these purchases for what they are: temporary patches on a structural issue. But as we look at the spending habits of men like Stephen, we have to address a larger, more systemic historical trend. It is the way the U.S. legal and financial system interacts with your consumer identity. We have talked about how you spend money, but we haven't talked about how the system tracks that spending and uses it as a benchmark for your future obligations. There is a historical intersection between your bank statement and your legal standing that most men ignore until it is too late. In the next part, we are going into the surveillance of consumption. We will look at how, in 2026, your digital spending habits can be used in court to determine everything from alimony adjustments to custody evaluations. We will examine the historical evolution of lifestyle audits and why your Disneyland dad weekends or your coping economy purchases might be creating a paper trail that could cost you far more than the initial price tag. The data on how consumer behavior is being weaponized in the legal system is the most important lesson you haven't learned yet. The surveillance of consumption is a concept that would have sounded like science fiction in the 1980s, but in 2026, it is a standard operating procedure in the American legal and financial ecosystem. Historically, a man's spending was a private matter, buried in paper receipts and cash transactions. Today, every swipe of a debit card, every digital wallet tap, and every subscription renewal forms a high-definition mosaic of your lifestyle. In the context of a divorce, this data is no longer just marketing fuel for big tech. It is evidence. We are seeing a historical shift where consumer behavior is being used as a primary metric to establish financial capacity and parental fitness. Imagine a man named Christopher living in Austin, Texas, in 2026. Christopher is 2 years post-divorce and is currently in a dispute regarding an upward modification of child support. Historically, the court would look at his W-2 or his tax returns to determine his obligations. However, in the modern era, the opposing counsel can request a lifestyle audit. This is a forensic examination of Christopher's digital footprint to see if his declared income matches his observed consumption. If Christopher has been participating in the coping economy or the Disneyland dad lifestyle we discussed earlier, his own bank statements become the prosecution's strongest witness. Every high-end dinner delivery, every premium seat at a ball game with his kids, and every luxury subscription for his solo living apartment is logged. Historically, these might have been seen as gifts or one-off treats. In 2026, they are aggregated by software that calculates a burn rate. If Christopher's bank statements show he is spending $3,000 a month on discretionary lifestyle items, a judge may conclude that he has the potential outcomes of a much higher financial ceiling than his base salary suggests. The market has made it so easy to spend money that it has simultaneously made it impossible to hide the ability to pay. This brings us to the historical rise of the litigation support consumer market. There is now an entire industry of software tools and consultants dedicated to mining the consumer data of divorced men. Historically, a private investigator would follow a subject to see if they were living beyond their means. In 2026, the investigator is a data scraper. They look for the telltale signs of the re-entry marketing phase. Did you buy a new European SUV? Did you check into a high-end resort during your non-custodial week? This data is cross-referenced with your reported assets. The historical trend shows that men are increasingly being caught in a pincer movement between their desire to consume and their legal requirement to provide. Step by step, the trap is set. Step 1. The consumer market targets you with high-status goods to help you reclaim your identity. Step 2. You finance or purchase these goods, creating a digital trail of high-level consumption. Step 3. That trail is used in a legal setting to argue that your standard of living has remained high, justifying higher support payments or a larger share of asset distribution. It is a cycle where the market sells you the poison and the legal system charges you for the cure. Consider the case study of social media as a consumer catalog. Historically, people use social media for connection. In 2026, for the divorced father, it is a liability. If you post a photo of your child with a brand new, top-of-the-line electric dirt bike, you have just provided a visual receipt of discretionary spending. Historical data from family law practitioners indicates that nearly 60% of modern cases now involve social media evidence of lifestyle. The consumer market encourages you to broadcast your purchases, while the legal market waits to catalog them. This leads to the phenomenon of defensive underconsumption. Historically, we have seen men in high-conflict divorces begin to suppress their spending to avoid creating this paper trail. But the market has an answer for that too. In 2026, we see a surge in the use of prepaid cards and secondary digital accounts that attempt to mask the true nature of spending. However, the historical trend shows that these measures are rarely effective against modern forensic accounting. The metadata of where and when you shop is almost always reconstructible. We must also analyze the impact of the credit-to-income ratio in the eyes of the court. Historically, having access to high credit limits was a sign of financial health. For the divorced father in 2026, it can be a double-edged sword. If you have $50,000 in available credit, the legal system may view that as a liquid resource. Even if you haven't spent it, the capacity to spend is often factored into the overall picture of your financial strength. This is a massive historical shift from the era when only realized income mattered. Imagine the psychological toll of this surveillance. You are a consumer in an economy that demands you spend to feel normal, but you are a litigant in a system that punishes you for that very spending. This creates a state of financial paralysis. Case studies of divorced men in 2026 show a marked increase in transaction anxiety, the fear that a single purchase will be used against them in a future hearing. This anxiety, ironically, drives men further into the coping economy, seeking relief in digital spaces where they feel unobserved, not realizing that those spaces are the most heavily tracked of all. But the surveillance of consumption doesn't just happen in the courtroom. It happens in the credit market. Historically, your marital status was a minor factor in your credit risk. In 2026, banks use predictive modeling to identify men who are in the middle of a divorce. They look for the typical spending patterns: the security deposit for a new apartment, the sudden surge in furniture purchases, the legal retainer payments. Historically, these patterns are associated with a higher risk of default. As a result, you might find your credit limits lowered or your interest rates increased exactly when you need them most. The market identifies your instability and prices its risk accordingly. This is the reality of the 2026 consumer market for the divorced dad. You are moving through a field of digital tripwires. Every purchase is a data point, and every data point has a potential outcome in your legal and financial future. To navigate this, you have to move away from the emotional spender model and toward the strategic auditor model. You have to treat your bank statement with the same gravity as a legal deposition. But even as you master the art of the audited lifestyle, there is a broader historical trend that is shifting the ground beneath your feet. It is the evolution of the career-consumer relationship. For decades, a man's job was his identity and his primary source of consumer power. But in the wake of a divorce, the way the market views your career, and the way you use your career to fuel your consumption, changes fundamentally. There is a hidden professional penalty that hits divorced men, and it is closely tied to the shift in how you spend your most valuable resource, your time. In the next part, we are going to look at the career consumption paradox. We will examine the historical data on the divorce wage gap for men, and how the loss of domestic support often leads to a decline in professional earning power, just as your expenses are peaking. We will look at the rise of the quiet quitting phenomenon among divorced fathers, and how the market is responding with new products for the downshifted lifestyle. The intersection of your paycheck and your post-divorce reality is more fragile than you think. The career consumption paradox is a structural trap that defines the economic experience of the modern American father. Historically, the traditional family unit functioned as a specialized labor partnership. While one partner focused on professional ascent, the other often managed the domestic logistics, the grocery shopping, the meal planning, the household maintenance, and the childcare coordination. When this partnership dissolves, the father doesn't just lose a spouse. he loses a domestic chief operating officer. In 2026, the market response to this loss has been the creation of a high-cost shadow infrastructure, but the real cost is measured in the erosion of professional earning power. Imagine a man named Daniel. Daniel is a senior project manager at a tech firm in Seattle. Before his divorce, Daniel was on a high-growth trajectory, frequently staying late for sprints and traveling for client acquisitions because the domestic front was covered. Post-divorce, Daniel is a 50-50 custodial parent. On his weeks with the children, his professional availability drops by 40%. He cannot stay for the 6 p.m. strategy meeting. He has to be at the soccer field. He cannot take the last-minute flight to Tokyo. He has no one to stay with the kids. Historically, this is known as the divorce wage gap for men. While married men historically earn a premium over single men, divorced men often see their career growth stall or regress, as they attempt to manage the total load of existence alone. The consumer market has stepped into this gap with the downshifted lifestyle category. Historically, if a man's career slowed down, he was seen as a failure. In 2026, the market has rebranded this as intentional living or the balanced father. We see a surge in products designed for the man who has stepped back from the corporate ladder. This includes subscription services for lower maintenance living, smaller scale housing, and a pivot in automotive marketing toward utility and longevity, rather than status. The market is effectively monetizing the decline of the male professional peak. Case studies from 2024 to 2026 show that divorced fathers are the fastest growing segment of the gig economy for services that save them time, but they are also the most likely to seek remote-first, lower-stress employment. This shift has massive historical implications. When a man moves from a $200,000 a year high-stress role to a $130,000 a year remote role to facilitate his custody schedule, his consumer profile changes overnight. He is no longer buying the luxury watch or the premium lease. He is buying time. The market for time-saving apps, automated domestic robots, and concierge services has exploded to capture the $70,000 difference in his potential spending. Step by step, the career consumption paradox works like this. Step 1. The divorce removes the domestic support system. Step 2. The father is forced to choose between professional neglect or parental neglect. Step 3. He chooses parental presence, leading to a plateau in his income. Step 4. The consumer market, recognizing his high value but lower growth status, sells him on the idea of the simplified life, ensuring he remains a consistent consumer of mid-tier, high-margin products even as his wealth-building capacity slows down. Historically, the U.S. economy relied on the ambitious father to drive consumption through debt-fueled growth. A man with a family and a mortgage is a motivated worker. But a man with a divorce decree and a shared custody arrangement is a compromised worker. Data suggests that divorced men in 2026 are 25% more likely to experience professional burnout. To combat this, the market has introduced the self-optimization for the solo professional sector. This includes expensive executive coaching, specialized mental health platforms, and biohacking retreats aimed at helping men maintain high performance on a fraction of the sleep and double the stress. Consider the historical trend of the professional penalty in housing. A married man's home is often located based on a dual income budget and school districts. A divorced man's home is often located based on a paradox. He needs to be close to his children's school, but also close to his place of work to minimize the commute and maximize his limited hours. This often forces him into the most expensive urban corridors. In 2026, the cost of a two-bedroom apartment near a major employment hub like Manhattan or San Francisco is so high that it can consume 50 to 60% of a divorced father's take-home pay. He is paying a premium for proximity because time has become his most expensive commodity. Imagine if Daniel tries to maintain his pre-divorce spending habits while his career growth has stalled. He is still paying for the high-end memberships, the car payment, and the electronics, but his income is no longer rising at 5 to 8% a year. This is the wealth attrition phase. Historically, this is when many divorced men fall into the credit trap. They use high-interest debt to bridge the gap between their old identity and their new reality. The consumer market encourages this through targeted credit offers that frame debt as a bridge to your new life. But there is a specific historical shift in how the 2026 market views the divorced father's retirement. Since the 1990s, the burden of retirement has shifted from the employer to the individual via the 401k. For the divorced man, the retirement account is often halved during the asset division. This means at age 45, he is starting with a 20-year deficit. The financial services market has responded with catch-up products, high-fee investment vehicles marketed as the solution to your late start. Historical trends show that these products often benefit the institution more than the individual, further siphoning off the man's remaining liquid capital. We also have to look at the professional image tax. Historically, a man's professional wardrobe and grooming were a secondary concern. In the 2026 workplace, which is heavily influenced by video conferencing and social presence, a man in transition feels the need to invest in a curated professional image to signal stability to his peers and superiors. The market for male grooming, premium office casual wear, and even minor cosmetic procedures has seen a historical uptick among men in the 40 to 55 age bracket following a divorce. They are buying the appearance of a man who still has it all together, even as their balance sheet tells a different story. This leads to the rise of the outsourced domesticity market. Because Daniel cannot be in two places at once, he becomes a heavy consumer of third-party services. He isn't just buying groceries. He is paying for the shopper, the driver, and the premium for the pre-cut vegetables. He isn't just doing laundry. He is using a wash and fold service. Historically, these tasks were part of the unpaid labor of the household. Now they are a significant monthly expense. In 2026, the average divorced father in a major metro area spends $1,200 a month on services that essentially replace the labor of a second adult. This is the hidden reality of the career consumption paradox. You are earning less because you are doing more at home, but you are spending more because you cannot do everything at home. You are being squeezed from both ends by a market that has optimized itself to profit from your lack of time. The historical evolution of the U.S. consumer market has moved from serving the family unit to mining the inefficiencies of the broken family unit. But as we look at the professional and financial strain on men like Daniel, we have to address the most volatile part of the equation. It is the way the market handles your desire for a new partner. We have talked about the dating apps, but we haven't talked about the historical rise of the second household risk and the consumer market for premarital protection. There is a whole industry designed to help you prepare for the next relationship, and it is built on the fear of repeating the past. In the next part, we are going into the protection economy. We will examine the historical data on the rise of the prenuptial industrial complex and the consumer market for asset protection trusts. We will look at how the 2026 market is selling security to men who have already been burned once, and why the cost of protecting your future can sometimes be as high as the cost of losing your past. The numbers on the price of fear in the modern market will redefine your view of the next date. The protection economy is a multi-billion-dollar sector that has historically capitalized on the psychological scarring of the first-time divorcee. In 2026, the market for financial and legal safety nets has moved from the backrooms of elite law firms to the mainstream consumer market. To understand this, we have to examine the historical shift in how men approach second and third marriages. In the 1970s and 80s, the concept of a prenuptial agreement was often viewed as a taboo, an admission of impending failure. Today, the consumer market has successfully rebranded these instruments as necessary risk management tools, similar to fire insurance or a car warranty. Imagine a man named Brian. Brian is 48, living in Phoenix, Arizona, and has finally stabilized his finances 5 years after a difficult divorce. He has recently met someone new and is considering cohabitation or marriage. Historically, Brian might have simply moved in and hoped for the best. In 2026, he is targeted by the prenuptial industrial complex. This market includes not just high-fee attorneys, but also digital platforms that offer template-based agreements and mediation services. For Brian, the entry cost into this protection economy starts at approximately $2,500 for a basic digital filing and can escalate to $15,000 for a bespoke, attorney-vetted document. The historical data on the rise of the prenuptial agreement is staggering. Between 2010 and 2026, the number of millennials and Gen X men requesting these documents has increased by nearly 400%. The market has shifted its pitch from protecting the ultra-wealthy to protecting the moderate assets of the middle-class father. The argument presented to Brian is simple. You cannot afford to lose half of your remaining retirement again. This is the price of fear. The consumer market has realized that the trauma of previous asset liquidation is a more powerful motivator than the hope of future partnership. Beyond the legal documents, we have the historical rise of the asset protection trust. Since the early 2020s, we have seen a surge in domestic asset protection trusts marketed specifically to divorced men as a way to ring-fence their existing capital from future marital claims. For Brian, setting up one of these trusts involves a complex web of fees: the initial setup fee, the annual trustee fee, and the legal maintenance fees. This is a classic example of defensive capitalization. Brian is paying a significant portion of his income to ensure that the rest of his income remains untouchable. Case studies of consumer behavior in 2026 show that men are willing to accept a lower immediate standard of living if it provides a perceived outcome of long-term financial security. Then there is the psychological consumer market, the post-traumatic growth sector. Historically, a man in Brian's position might have just moved on. In 2026, he is encouraged to invest in specific types of therapy, coaching, and seminars designed to vet future partners. This is a market that monetizes the fear of the repeat mistake. Brian is served ads for high-end matchmaking services that promise to conduct deep background checks and psychological profiling on potential mates. The cost for these services can range from $5,000 to $20,000 annually. The historical trend here is the transition from organic courtship to a highly transactional, risk-mitigated model of human connection. Step by step, the protection economy extracts value from Brian's caution. Step 1. The market reinforces the narrative of his vulnerability, reminding him of what he lost in the first divorce. Step 2. The market offers a suite of high-tech and legal solutions to prevent a recurrence. Step 3. The market attaches recurring maintenance costs to these solutions, ensuring Brian remains a client of the protection economy for the duration of his next relationship. This creates a hidden security surcharge on his life that his never-divorced peers do not pay. We must also look at the historical data regarding life insurance as a defensive tool. In 2026, many divorced men are purchasing second-to-die policies or specialized term policies with riders that specifically address the needs of children from multiple marriages. The complexity of these products is a direct response to the fragmentation of the American family. Brian is now balancing the insurance needs of his first household with the insurance requirements of a potential second household. This results in a layering of premiums that can consume 10% of his gross income. The insurance industry has historically benefited from the increased complexity of the modern father's life, as more complexity always requires more coverage. Consider the case study of the private investigator industry. Historically, PIs were used to catch cheating spouses. In 2026, the PI market has shifted toward premarital screening. Divorced dads are now hiring digital forensics experts to audit the financial and social history of their new partners before an engagement. This is a manifestation of the trust but verify consumer model. The market has successfully convinced men that in the 2026 landscape, intuition is a liability and data is the only reliable form of safety. This leads to the rise of the cohabitation agreement market. For men who are too wary to remarry but want a live-in partner, the market offers legal contracts that mimic the protections of a divorce decree without the marriage license. These agreements address everything from the division of household expenses to the ownership of the pets. Historically, these were rare. Today, they are a standard product offered by any family law firm. For Brian, this represents another $3,000 in legal fees just to allow someone to move into his guest bedroom. The protection economy is essentially a tax on the memory of loss. Every dollar Brian spends on trusts, prenups, and background checks is a dollar he cannot spend on his current lifestyle or his children's future. However, the market has framed these expenditures as investments in peace of mind. Historical trends show that once a man has entered the protection economy, he rarely leaves. He becomes a permanent consumer of security, constantly upgrading his legal and financial defenses as his assets grow and his relationships evolve. Imagine if Brian could see his lifetime ledger. He would see a massive spike in spending during the divorce, followed by a sustained high-level expenditure on protection services for the rest of his life. This is the structural reality of the post-divorce market. You are never truly finished with the economic impact of the split. You simply move into the phase where you pay to prevent it from happening again. But as we look at the walls Brian is building around his life, we have to ask the final, most important question of this deep dive. What does the endgame look like for the American divorce father? We have looked at the housing, the toys, the taxes, the insurance, the dating apps, and the protection tools. Now we need to synthesize all of this data to see the final historical arc of the U.S. consumer market. We are going to look at the legacy phase, the point where the divorced man has to reconcile his consumer identity with his final financial reality. In the final part of this masterclass, we are going to look at the Great Transfer. We will examine the historical data on how divorce impacts intergenerational wealth transfer, and the final consumer choices of the divorced male. We will look at the rise of the solo elder market and how the 2026 economy is preparing for a wave of divorced fathers hitting retirement with a unique set of needs and challenges. The conclusion to this series will reveal the ultimate cost of the divided household and what it means for the future of the American economy. The final data set will show you exactly where this road ends. The Great Transfer represents the final economic chapter in the life of the American divorced father, a phase where the cumulative effects of decades of fragmented consumption finally manifest in the realm of estate planning and terminal wealth. Historically, the American dream was predicated on the seamless transfer of a primary residence and a concentrated pool of liquid assets from a unified pair of parents to their offspring. By 2026, the data shows that the dissolution of the nuclear unit decades prior acts as a permanent drag on the velocity of that wealth transfer. This is not just a personal issue for men like Brian or Thomas. It is a structural shift in the U.S. economy as trillions of dollars are siphoned away into the service sectors we have explored throughout this masterclass. Imagine a man named Gary. It is 2026, and Gary is 72 years old. He divorced in his late 30s and spent the next 35 years navigating the consumer landscape we have meticulously detailed. He bought the duplicate household goods, paid the insurance marriage penalty, funded the Disneyland dad excursions, and eventually paid for the legal fortress of the protection economy. As Gary approaches his final years, he faces the solo elder market. Historically, elderly care was a shared domestic burden managed by a spouse or a singular, consolidated family estate. For Gary, the market has replaced that domestic support with high-cost institutional care. The historical data on the cost of solo aging for divorced men is a stark revelation. In 2026, the average cost of assisted living for a single male in a metro area like Phoenix or Charlotte has risen to nearly $7,000 a month. Because Gary does not have a spouse to provide even basic home care support, he enters the institutional care market an average of 5 years earlier than his married counterparts. This 5-year window represents an additional $420,000 in capital erosion that would have otherwise formed part of his children's inheritance. Historically, this is the final extraction point for the consumer market. We must also examine the historical evolution of the inheritance fracture. In a unified household, the estate is typically left to the surviving spouse and then to the children. In the case of a divorced father with children from multiple marriages, a common demographic in 2026, the estate is often divided into smaller, less impactful fragments. Case studies of probate court filings show that the legal fees for settling the estate of a divorced father are on average 30% higher due to the complexity of competing claims and the presence of prenuptial agreements or trusts. The consumer market for estate litigation is the final entity to take a seat at the table. Step by step, the legacy phase reveals the ultimate cost of the divided household. Step 1. The depletion of the primary asset pool to fund solo living and elder care. Step 2. The legal friction of multi-household distribution. Step 3. The final tax implications of non-spousal transfers. Historically, the tax code has always favored the surviving spouse. Without that shield, Gary's estate is hit by the full weight of individual transfer taxes, further reducing the net benefit to his heirs. The U.S. economy in 2026 is increasingly dependent on this fragmentation. Every dollar Gary spent on a premium solo apartment in his 50s, every dollar spent on a convenience-focused lifestyle in his 60s, and every dollar spent private nursing in his 70s is a dollar that was moved from the category of intergenerational wealth to the category of corporate revenue. We are witnessing the commercialization of the family legacy. The market has figured out how to turn the quiet, unpaid labor of a family into a series of high-margin service invoices. Let us look at the historical data of the travel and leisure market for solo seniors. In 2026, there is a booming market for specialized cruises and retirement communities targeting the divorced male. These products are sold on the premise of newfound freedom, but their economic function is to accelerate the liquidation of the father's remaining assets. Gary is encouraged to spend his children's inheritance on experiences, a trend known as skiing, spending the kid's inheritance. Historically, this trend has gained massive traction since the 2010s, driven by a consumer market that promotes self-actualization over legacy. While Gary has every right to enjoy his capital, the market's aggressive targeting of this sentiment ensures that the financial stability of the next generation is secondary to quarterly earnings reports. This brings us to the ultimate conclusion of our 10-part deep dive. The historical review of the U.S. consumer market for divorced dads reveals a system that is not broken, but perfectly optimized. It is optimized to extract a premium from transition, a tax on loneliness, a fee for protection, and a surcharge on distance. From the moment the decree is signed, the market views the father as a high-velocity spender who must recreate an entire civilization within the walls of a two-bedroom apartment. Imagine the counterfactual. If a man like Gary had remained in a unified household, the historical data suggests his net worth would be approximately 40 to 60% higher, his health outcomes would be statistically better, and his transition into the eldercare market would be delayed. But the 2026 economy does not want that. The 2026 economy thrives on the 1.5x to 2x spending increase that divorce triggers. This masterclass has shown that your bank statement is a mirror of your social structure. As we conclude this series, we have to look toward the future. The patterns we have identified are not slowing down. They are accelerating. The rise of AI-driven consumer targeting means that the next generation of divorced fathers will face even more precise extraction tools. The algorithms will know exactly when your custodial weekend ends and when your Sunday night loneliness begins. They will offer the perfect dopamine hit at the exact moment your defenses are lowest. The lesson of this historical review is not one of despair, but of radical awareness. By seeing the market for what it is, a series of calculated responses to your emotional and legal state, you gain the power of the strategic consumer. You can choose to bypass the Disneyland dad trap, you can audit your own coping economy spending, and you can resist the re-entry marketing that promises a new identity at the price of your long-term wealth. But even as we finish this investigation into the consumer market, a new and perhaps even more significant shift is occurring in the way men handle the most fundamental part of their financial life, their labor. There is a movement growing among fathers in 2026 to decouple their identity from their productivity in a way we have never seen before. We have explored how you spend, but we have yet to explore the emerging history of how men are redefining work itself in the wake of the Great Decoupling. The data on the Great Labor Shift of 2026 is already coming in, and it suggests that the way men earn money is about to become as fragmented and optimized as the way they spend it. If you thought the consumer market was a deep dive, you are not ready for the reality of the post-divorce workplace. The next series will uncover the rise of the independent utility worker and the end of the corporate father as we know it. The road doesn't just end here. It branches into a completely different economic reality,